Welcome to Stay Home, Stay Focused. I am Jack Moline, the president of Interfaith Alliance, and my guest today is Reverend Leonard L. Hamlin Sr., who is the Canon Missioner for the Washington National Cathedral. Leonard, I'm very glad you're with me today. It's always good to be talking to you, although we always seem to have a microphone in front of us when we're doing that. Before we get down to business, let's get to the most important question, which is, how are you doing?
First of all, let me say, Jack, it's good to be with you. I'm doing, I think, as many would say, quite well. I'm thankful that I'm well, family is well. When I look around, we're all in safe places and managing, even though there is a sense, I should really say, a feeling of the strangeness that we're all walking through right now.
Yep. And during this time, we're all, of course, sort of obsessed with washing our hands and keeping ourselves and our loved ones safe. But how are you maintaining your personal focus during this time, aside from all of that?
It's an interesting question because, we enter into so many conversations of trying to find a new normal, which is the term we're all putting forward right now. But for me personally, it's trying to at least put some milestones within the patterns or routines that we have right now. That trying to find a sense that, of course, the morning devotional or quiet time has become that much more essential to me. It was probably before, but not knowing what I'm going to face throughout the day or the conversations or getting through. It's being able to start the day perhaps in similar fashion, as well as make significant, what I call connections throughout the day.
It's a great framing of the circumstance, and you seem to be handling it well. So let's get down to talking a little bit about you and the cathedral and your role there. You have the title Canon Missioner. And for those people who are not inside the baseball of the Episcopal Church, they may not know what that means. So could you explain that?
Certainly. Within the positions, of course, the Episcopal Church as well as the cathedral, is that those who are directly, of course, working with the bishop or who hold senior leadership at a cathedral are given the title canon. As well as installed into that position. And so I have the responsibility as Canon Missioner, as we say, for the work of the church. All that we carry out within the community and beyond the walls and in the lives of those, as we look at our work. There's a canon a vicar who has a responsibility for our congregation. There's a canon of worship who has responsibility for the worship, and other significant persons who have made what we would call deep contributions within the life of the church are given the role of canon.
Very, very nice, very nice. Now, the Washington National Cathedral fills a role as the nation's church, as it were. How did that come to be, and how does that function these days?
It's interesting in that as the cathedral was, of course, built now over 100 years ago, is that it was built with the mindset and purpose of creating a space and really offering a space where you could hold and draw people and convene people together for national gatherings and for national purpose. That's those significant moments where we can probably put it best to say we all need to be together. And there is a sense of unity and strength by coming together. In offering that, there has been, of course, the acceptance through the years to hold significant gatherings at the cathedral. We know that the space, the architecture, and all that went into building such a significant architectural edifice really helped it to move into the prominence of being the nation's church and the role that it has.
You've had some challenges to that structure of of late. The earthquake we had a few years ago, I know, damaged parts of the cathedral that people don't access very much and shouldn't access, because if they fall, there's a lot of danger. Are the repairs done, or is that still going on?
No, actually, there's still a significant amount of repairs to be done that are left to be done. The cathedral receives no national funds or is supported through the government. I think that's probably a topic or a question that often gets raised as well as addressed by many of us at the cathedral as on a week-to-week basis, as well as others. But with that, all of the work is done by the repair is done by the generosity of those around the country and throughout the world who support the work of the cathedral and the mission that we have. So there's still a significant portion left to be done, as you mentioned, on the towers. If you were to drive by, or for those who were driving by when we were out and about, you still would be able to see some of the scaffolding around the tower.
Yeah, I think you've made a very important point, and I probably should have clarified before I mentioned the nation's church. There is no government investment in the cathedral. The cathedral makes itself available for these public occasions and maintains itself. Certainly, there are always going to be costs involved when anybody gathers in any kind of building that is public or semi-public. But just as a lot of people at home watching this or listening to this know that there are polling places in private institutions like religious buildings or community gathering spaces, the cathedral itself has been very generous in offering itself to the American public. And that's really critical for people to understand. I know that just as canon missioner is sort of a specialized title in the Episcopal Church, parts of the church go by the specialized name that have need some explanation. So the cathedral was most recently in the news for discovering a supply of face masks that were stored in the crypt. Talk about the crypt a little bit.
Well, as we know, there are within any cathedral, there are underground portions and, of course, passageways, better to be able to use that term, and storage areas. We're thankful that there have been and there are perhaps a few persons who have been around for a period of time, and our head stonemason, Joe Alonzo, who has been at the cathedral and has a lot of institutional knowledge. He remembered that there were face masks purchased during the earthquake for the work that needed to be done at that time. And so it triggered something in his memory when the pandemic and the discussion of masks came up. So he knew right where to go. And thankfully, there were the masks that were present and a significant number that we would not have used for all of those, with the operations being limited in time. So after much discussion, the decision was made to really donate those to our frontline and medical workers.
Another very generous act, and it's somehow endearing to know that that an institution like the cathedral is afflicted with the same thing that those of us who are homeowners are afflicted with, is that we have places that we put things away and then forget about them entirely until sometime later when they're discovered almost accidentally. The cathedral's mission.
You always
Sorry?
find the need. You really raised that well. I think most of us have to remember that a lot of our movement sometimes is driven by needs.
Right.
And so this need came about, and it drove, of course, the memory as well as the action.
I know that the cathedral doesn't rely on a local constituency, on local congregants, in order to sustain its program, neither annually nor week to week. That instead, you mostly host visitors from around the country and indeed around the world. How has life at the cathedral changed with the sequestering and the quarantine that's going on?
Well, as we know, probably the first obvious sense that you get when you walk into the cathedral is the vast emptiness. But for those who have been able to go in and out or conduct services via the web and the internet on Sunday mornings, is that you're used to seeing the activity and the movement of families and faces coming through, making pilgrimages to the cathedral, as well as those who are drawn for so many different reasons. Now, we're just like everyone else. We're trying to look at what is needed now and respond to that within small groups, taking a look at technology, trying to connect with individuals as we're connecting even right now via these platforms that we may have had a certain regard for, but now we recognize and are perhaps discussing how they can be used even in greater ways.
I wonder what it's like, and you know, to stand in the front of this magnificent and massive cathedral and conduct worship and preach to a completely empty room. It's like a scene from Eleanor Rigby.
Yes, yes. It is strange to look out, but I think maybe some of us have had just enough exposure to perhaps talking to cameras or conference calls that what you're concentrating on at that moment is that someone's listening,
Right.
And that there is a message to be given. And so we lift that and probably reflect upon, what we've seen probably after the experience, and we are talking about it, wondering about it, and trying to keep each other focused on the kind of messages that are really needed for times like this.
Mm-hmm. You and I are very much allies in considering the question of the role of religion in American public life. We come at it from slightly different directions. The cathedral describes itself as a house of prayer for all people. What does that mean?
Well, it means, if we put the probably our Christian foundation at the very foundation of this, is that come as you are. We are all at times, as we say, maybe traveling different roads to the center. But what does it mean to really come together as one? We all have different expressions. Hopefully, in my position, that I'm a great witness of that even as Canon missioner, and let me say, although this is reflected in a different way, I'm in an Episcopal setting as a Baptist. And for years before coming to the cathedral, I was pastoring a Baptist church unexpectedly, and now at the cathedral. And we are sharing different expressions even. And that goes not just through, of course, our different denominations, but we look at our different faiths and interfaith and how we all share. I laugh and I have a great time, of course, teasing my peers and them teasing me in our expressions that really over the past few years as a Baptist, I had to really learn how to speak good Episcopalian.
There's a great line from MASH where Father Mulcahy talks about that a little bit, but that's great. That's great.
Yes, indeed.
There are, however, values that are embedded in the cathedral, almost literally, or not almost literally embedded in the cathedral, that might make it difficult for people of a particular perspective to come in and feel that they are welcomed. I'll give you this example. One of the most recent is that the cathedral did a magnificent job of honoring the memory and the remains of Matthew Shepard by including him in the very small group of people who are interred in the cathedral, and in endorsing the life's work of his parents in honoring his memory and advancing the cause of the co-humanity of all people in the LGBTQ plus community. Can someone walk in with a different theological perspective on human sexuality and still feel welcomed at the cathedral?
Well, I certainly believe that they can, that they would walk in and feel welcome, no matter where you're coming from. I think part of being able to move forward in life is the challenge to engage each other in life. And I think what the cathedral also provides the opportunity for many and all of us to do is to have the kind of conversations to where we can grow together and find out what we share in common and those shared values at certain levels. We begin, of course, standing where we are, where our feet are planted. It does take movement to get and stand in the same space. Are we willing to move? I think that's an individual question that all of us will have to answer at particular moments within our lives. But the need for that is important if we're going to, of course, move together with the kind of unity that would be beneficial for all of us.
Great answer. A great answer. Let me turn, if you'll let me, to the slightly more personal, because I think that people who see folks like you and like me who chose a path to work in the Lord's vineyard, so to speak, we're sort of curious creatures to them. What was your path to your pastorate, to your priesthood?
I'll try and make this as succinct as I can. There are many who clearly are able to articulate that, and it seems as if there was some order and straight line path. For me, there was a sense, what I would call of almost a chaotic pattern, but a sense of calling. I began early in life where the church did play a very important and hold a very important space in my home, in my family, between my parents, growing up in Brooklyn, New York, and in the community in which I grew up. My great grandfather was pastor of the church where I grew up in Brooklyn. So it very much influenced. I went to a very prominent elementary school, religious elementary school in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, that it played a role within the shaping of my thoughts and patterns. As I grew up, somewhere in high school as well, I really wrestled with perhaps going into ministry because I had a wonderful relationship with my pastor growing up. We can see these influences when we look back, but growing up at Mount Lebanon Baptist Church in Brooklyn, New York with Reverend Laws, I had a wonderful relationship with him and began to wrestle. Even as a senior, I had finished most of my core work, had 2 independent studies, and chose to do independent studies on religion. And for whatever reason, I applied to schools and colleges. Perhaps 2 of them, it might have been 3, were School of Religion, but I made a decision that I was way too young for this. I couldn't tell anybody or give them advice on what to do with their life, and really walked away from it. Sometime, a few years later, even in that, which probably made me at least think about life in certain ways, I had a near fatal car accident.
Wow.
Where here in Washington, D.C., just driving back into the city, a gentleman fell asleep or passed out in the opposite direction and hit the car head on. It was a call to my parents to tell them that they didn't think I was going to make it. This was years ago, 1981. And we know tests were slower. Things did not move with the sort of speed that they move today. And probably one of the most intriguing aspects of that is that when they, with everything that I had wrong, and really was head to toe, I had a ruptured spleen. And when they finally got me in, figuring that there was going to be so much internal infection from having a ruptured spleen, it was going to cause me even greater issues for mortality. And that when they opened me up, they found out that I was born with a fully functioning secondary spleen.
Wow.
So I'm one of few that was born with 2. Having it fully functioning was the interesting part. they pulled back the skin to tie off the one that had ruptured, they found the second one. I didn't make an immediate decision, but it certainly affected my life. I was fortunate to be able to meet my wife some years later, in the midst of that, who in her own walk of faith said, well, if we're going to go out, you've got to go to church with me. I said, oh, I could do that. And one thing led to another, which probably when I made my fullness and commitment was right after my son was born. I had gone home, sitting, as they say, in the back of a service, holding my son. And when I looked at him, I asked myself, what should I really be doing with my life? And I could see further than me. Hopefully that gives a good sense of the story.
You've got all the elements there, Leonard. You've got wrestling the way our biblical father Jacob did. You have a crossroads experience the way so many religious figures have. And in the end, it was the power of love. What more can you ask for than that?
Yes, indeed.
We are just about at the end of our time. And I want to ask you what I try to ask each of my guests, which is if you can recommend one thing to the people who are watching and listening that will inspire and engage them during these difficult times, what would it be?
I would say to really seek out connections in a unique way at this moment. What I mean by that is I was asked not too long ago about how do I sustain myself during this time. And what I really had to recognize was that although I'm doing work to sustain myself and reflecting upon the individual activities, I more than likely have been much more sustained by others. It is the relationships and the connections. And it will bring us to an awareness, I believe, of how much we really need each other. Even this connection in this moment, Jack, I appreciate that we've done these over the mic, but being able to talk to you, how much this does, even for me to connect with you, to reflect about work, life, home, family. You might be just going about, as we say, partly the work that you've been given in your hands, but it's your work that is bringing such strength to me today. And I think we do that for each other. And I think as we walk through this pandemic, there's a need for us to see across all the divisions that we can so identify easily and see the unity and sometimes the hidden, of course, values that we share that really make us all of God's creation, one humanity. And we can share the kind of love that we have for each other. And we find that in our relationships one with another.
As they say, Leonard, that'll preach.
Oh.
Leonard Hamlin, Canon Missioner at the Washington National Cathedral, thank you for being my guest today. To all of you who are watching and listening, please stay home, stay focused.